This is the You, Me, and BTC podcast.
Cryptocurrency decrypted.
Welcome to episode 71. One of the biggest problems that Bitcoin is expected to face in the near future is scalability. New users show up every day, and veteran Bitcoiners are always finding new ways to spend their coin. Unfortunately, like everything else in life, Bitcoin has its limits. This week, we're chatting about an article called The Capacity Cliff by Mike Hearn. As a Bitcoin developer and a former Google employee, he probably knows what he's talking about, and he thinks Bitcoin will max out in less than 2 years. Today, we'll discuss some of the solutions that have been proposed, like faster networks that run on top of Bitcoin. We'll also explain why Hearn thinks that raising the block size limit is our only viable option, even though it would involve a hard fork. Your hosts are just Tim Baker and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, another You, Me, and BTC podcast. This will be episode 71. Glad to have you on another Thursday, is when you'll be listening to this. Thursday, May 7th. I am Daniel Brown, and I'm here with
Tim Baker.
Yep, just me and Tim today. Another week. John is on vacation, isn't he, Tim? Is he at the beach or something?
I have no idea. I don't know. I've texted with him a few times, but he hasn't said anything.
Well,
about
I know he said Virginia, and I know he goes to the beach in the early summer, so that's my guess. I feel like I should know more about this person.
I feel like you shouldn't know, like if he hasn't brought it up, because John just tends to do that. He just goes places. I think he went to Colorado one time, and I think I heard about it once before, but then he just left. And I was like, I didn't remember it was now.
Yeah, I know he had a lot of good stories from that trip, though, so.
Well, just not to imply that he had any good John is not a stoner at all, so.
I think it might have even.
No, it wasn't. It was like right after it got legalized.
Okay.
John went with someone else, and I don't know, just the people who went, I was like, it just seems so weird.
Anyway, so yeah, I guess we'll take it away without John for one more week. He should be back next week, hopefully. So we do have actually, I have to say, this is one of the most interesting articles that I think I've read in my time in the Bitcoin space. I'm not going to say the most interesting, because I'm sure I've forgotten some awesome articles, but I really did enjoy this one that I read, and we're going to talk it all over. It's from Mike Hearn, he did a lot of work on, I guess the term core dev can be a little bit loose. I'm not sure if he's technically a core dev for Bitcoin, but I know he's been working on Bitcoin J, which is a specific version of Bitcoin. He says it's like an engine behind Bitcoin. It's J because it's in Java. So anyway, the point is he knows a ton about Bitcoin. He's been into it for years, and he's been coding some big parts of it. So he's a really legit guy, and this article, it's from May 5th, so it's really recent, and it's titled The Capacity Cliff. And he's talking about the capacity of the Bitcoin network. Basically, it's all about, right now we're really pushing the capacity. There's a block size limit with Bitcoin, and we're nearing the point where if we put up a transaction, it could take a really long time to get fit into a block, I guess. It's a little hard to explain, but we're going to do our best to make that happen. And we're going to explain what he says the problem is, some proposed solutions, and the reason, and basically just what he thinks the best solution is for now. So before we get into that, though, Tim, just tell me what do you know about the block limit and about the capacity of the Bitcoin network?
I honestly don't know that much. I know that, I mean, it makes sense to me that there's a capacity for something. I'm not exactly sure what that something is. He artificially limited its capacity, like that's the amount of Bitcoin that's able to be mined.
No, actually, it's the data limit on a block. And basically, I think it's around 1 megabyte. I've heard that number before. They might have changed it. But basically, a block is just a chunk of data describing who sent money to who and stuff like that. And the more transactions you have in one block, the more data that's going to be in that block. And part of the reason for this limit is because everybody around the world that runs a Bitcoin node, not only do they have to store that data in the blockchain, but they have to transfer it, they have to be communicating it regularly. It's a huge, one megabyte doesn't sound like much, but when you have thousands of nodes processing and storing and transferring blocks, nonstop, whenever a new client signs up, you have to feed him the entire blockchain, plus whatever blocks are being mined in real time, whatever transactions are going on at any given time. That, 1 megabyte doesn't sound like much, but the blocks pile up every 10 minutes, so that's a lot of data. And that's, does that...
I think what you're meaning is a megabyte seems like a lot.
No, it's a megabyte? Are you kidding me?
Well, then why are you're, okay, I mean, so you're saying, like, it's gonna build up the block is running out of space for transactions to happen? Is that what the idea is?
Well, that 1 megabyte is the maximum block size. So a transaction can be different sizes, I mean, depending on what all data is in a single transaction. But let's just say, for the number's sake, I don't know, that one transaction was 1 kilobyte. If the average size of a transaction was 1 kilobyte, there's 1,000 kilobytes in a megabyte, so you could only fit 1,000 transactions into one block. And the problem with that is that means that there's a limit of 1,000 transactions per every 10 minutes. And that's the issue there, is that by limiting the block size, you limit the number of transactions per minute or per second or whatever.
Okay. So, what happens if they don't do anything? Like, they can't do that, but tell me what happens.
Right.
Or at least they're saying they can't do that. What happens if they don't do anything, if they just let it go?
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. So basically it would be, that limit would be enforced. Let's say the limit was 1 megabyte. Let's say the average was 1 kilobyte per transaction. Then that limit of 1,000 transactions per 10 minutes would be enforced. And that's a huge issue because, actually, I'm going to look it up right now just to get a comparison. Let's say Visa transactions per day. Sure, why not per day? Okay, there it is. It came up in per seconds. Visa handles 2,000 transactions per second. So if the Bitcoin limit was 1,000 transactions per 10 minutes, that would be a huge, not huge, it would be a tiny limit and a huge limitation. So that would be the problem, is that whenever you put up a transaction, it might take a long time before somebody finally found it and made room for it in a block.
Okay. And this is because more people are using it. That's
yeah,
the problem.
It's just a higher transaction volume. Yeah. It's interesting. When I first looked that up, the first page, I didn't say anything about Bitcoin. All I said was Visa transactions per day. And the first Google result was scalability Bitcoin.
Okay, so that's, whenever people are talking about scalability, that's normally when it's, I mean, I guess that would make sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to be considered.
Things,
the size of the blockchain is one thing, and there's probably other aspects too, but the main thing is probably transactions per time is probably the main factor. Because, I mean, yeah, the blockchain getting bigger is a problem, and I'm sure there's going to be ways to deal with that. But at the moment, I guess the transactions per time is a lot more important. And even if the blockchain was 10 or 100 times as big, it would be harder to manage, but space is available. It's a terabyte hard drive is pretty cheap still, so. But I mean, I'm not saying that it would be good to have the blockchain be a terabyte. That would be terrible, and it would be really hard to manage, but it's just speed is more important. Why would it be terrible? Well, because everybody has to be communicating the blockchain almost nonstop. They have to be storing it, and once in a while they'll be sending another node.
Constantly just doing a terabyte worth of it.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's not like I have to send that every second to every node that I'm connected to, but when a new node signs up, they are going to have to download that whole thing, and that'll take, I mean, it already takes... How long
would that take?
It already can take several days with, I'm guessing we're around...
for me.
Yeah, I think we're around 20 gigabytes right now. So
it took a few days back whenever I downloaded it back in 2013?
Yeah, it was
13 or 14?
It was the end of 2012, the beginning of 2013 is when we first started this stuff. But yeah, and I think at that point it was probably around 5 gigabytes. And the reason it takes longer on Bitcoin, I mean, you could download a 5 gigabyte file from a website in maybe a few hours, depending on where the website was, where the server was, I guess.
No, yeah, torrent stuff, you can get stuff real quick.
Right. The reason it just takes a little bit long, it can take longer with Bitcoin, is just because you're connecting directly to other computers, not necessarily to servers that are designed for, delivering large chunks of data. I mean, some nodes are, actual servers, but you also can connect directly to another computer, which is usually a slower connection.
Yeah, that's to help foster. I mean, is that that's part of the decentralization?
Right.
Part of it, kind of? Okay.
The fact that I can run a node on my PC is pretty helpful in that regard, yeah. Anyway, so I think that was some really valuable background information. It is background information. I mean, it's not the main point of this article, but it was good to get all of that out there, because that really is the core of what he's talking about here, is the fact that there is an artificially imposed limit. It's just there because that's what the software says. And that is becoming a problem. His estimate is that we're going to hit capacity by the beginning of winter 2016. So call it a year and a half. So that's some decent time, but it's approaching quickly. And that's also when we're going to hit the capacity, not when we're going to start noticing problem. Well, it's a scale, there is no definite capacity. I guess it'll all be defined just by how many problems and how much slowness you're going to notice. But by his rough numbers, that's when it's going to become a real problem, is around winter 2016 and possibly earlier. So that's a good thing to consider. He says he worked at Google for 8 years, and part of this actually was interesting. I don't know if it was his actual job title, but this is what he calls himself. He says, I was a professional capacity planner. That was his job at Google, was just managing the capacity of the servers. I don't know, that sounds like really specific, but it's a really cool, I think it's a really cool idea. And the fact that he's dealing with those exact same problems is interesting, and it sheds light on the fact that I think he knows what he's talking about, so.
Hopefully.
Well, yeah, definitely. But I guess his main point there, though, was to say that he knows, based on his experience, he knows that you have to start dealing with this stuff early, because it just takes a while to roll everything out, to get everybody on the same page, and to actually deal with the problem. So even though the problems might not come until winter 2016, we have to start dealing with them as soon as we can, so... Okay, so I think that's basically his intro, and I guess the rest is, well, there's a couple subsections here, but I think for our discussion we can divide it into 2 phases. The first one is the idea of having faster layers built on top of the Bitcoin network that they're kind of outside of that capacity limit. So we'll get into that next, and we're just going to describe what some existing examples are for a network like that. And then the final phase that we'll talk about, I don't know why I'm being so specific about this, but I think it's making sense. It's basically him describing that even though these networks can exist and even though they will be cool and helpful, he doesn't think that that's going to be the solution right away. And we'll get into that. So anyway, Tim, just for fun, just because I want to see how you describe it, do you want to try and give your description of of the payment channels of the Lightning Network? Do you want to try and explain what they're trying to do by building these layers on top of Bitcoin?
Well, I will try, and I'll try not look at the page.
Well, I mean, you can look at it
right in front of me.
This isn't a quiz. I just want to see what you come up with and how much I can
I know.
show off my skills by correcting you.
Yes. It sounded like they were saying that they would, run an entirely separate payment system on top of the Bitcoin network that would do a lot of the smaller transactions, which is what I thought sounded the coolest or the most useful, because it solved the problem of the smaller transactions that you need a quick confirmation for, because apparently for some reason it would make it go fast. It would be faster than a Bitcoin transaction, and it would run on top of the network for those transactions, but you'd need to get everyone onto an entirely different system because you wouldn't be using the Bitcoin addresses anymore. You'd be doing something separate. And it just seemed like it'd be really confusing, and not really confusing necessarily.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure they could implement it pretty.
It would be more complex. That is that's a whole section of this is the complexity.
Yeah, but we're going to do that in something else, right?
We'll get to it when we get to it. I don't know.
How is it connected to the Bitcoin network?
Right. So basically, and this is a huge abstraction. I'm sure there are a lot of little technical things and specifications or whatever, but to put it as generally as I can, and I guess I'll more or less use his example, is basically having a pot where, I don't know if it's off of the Bitcoin network or on top of the Bitcoin network or beside the Bitcoin network. I'm not quite sure how the best way to describe it would be, but the most important thing is that it would be much faster. And what you're going to do is you're going to use this different network to send transactions. If they're small, if you need a lot of them really fast, you can use this different network and it will handle that. It'll handle a lot of transactions quickly by not directly using Bitcoin. So that's basically the pot. You're going to put all your money into the pot, and this network or server is going to handle all those right away. And then after some time, instead of having, say, 10,000 little transactions, they're going to settle all of that in one condensed Bitcoin transaction. They're going to take the pot, they're going to split up that money and settle it in one Bitcoin transaction, or a few, however they handle it. And that's already a thing that exists in the traditional financial system. It's called clearing. You know what that is, Tim? Where basically banks, they do a bunch of transactions and every once in a while they clear them and settle everything out and balance everything. Again, that's a generalization. I'm sure I'm not describing it perfectly, but does that make sense to you, Tim?
Putting a bunch of transactions together and setting them at the same time.
Yeah, that's probably the one sentence way of putting my stumbling and yeah. Yeah, basically they take a lot of transactions quickly and eventually they'll combine them and settle them in a condensed way. It's a proposed solution. It's an idea that people have come up with, and there are a couple companies that are already implementing it. This one is called StrawPay, and the network is called Lightning. It's called the Lightning Network. And there's also, I think it's the same thing, but they call the protocol that StrawPay uses for the Lightning Network is Strom, S-T-R-O-M or S-T-R-O-E-M. I guess they both count. But I was confused for a while when I read this because there's 3 different names and they're more or less all the same thing. So it took me a minute to figure that out. But they already are doing this with the Lightning Network. It's not rolled out yet. It's more of just a protocol, a prototype maybe. They're trying to make it work. And the author here, Mike Hearn, he does say he really likes the idea. He thinks it might come about eventually. He thinks it could be maybe even ubiquitous. Is that the right word? Where everybody just uses it? He's not against
this kind of yeah. He sounds like he's really kind of like, this is cool. I'm interested in this. This sounds great and everything. And kind of like how you and I both sounded like that when we were reading through it.
Right. Yeah, he's not against this at all, but he does see problems, and I guess he thinks it'll take a while, I guess. So
he sounds like he's saying this is great, but it's not what we need right now.
Yeah.
We need to focus on something else.
Right. It's great, but it's not ready yet. That's pretty much it. And
or I mean, if it's not that it's not necessarily not ready, but also that it's not the solution to the problem they have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
at all. Like it doesn't help them. Like it could, I guess, but it's so much more than they need.
Well, right. Yeah, that's one of his main things, like we said, is the complexity. Having a network like this, I won't get into all the specific details. He talks about the difference between like a hub network and a peer-to-peer network and or what is it, hub and spoke and stuff. I'll try not to get into all of that little stuff, but basically adding a layer like this would add a lot of code, it would add a lot of protocols, and on the surface, if you make something, or if you write a program that works perfectly, but it's really complex, that's not necessarily a problem, because if it works, and you don't really have to look at the code after if it works, But the problem in this situation is, this is something we talk about all the time on the show. I guess from a broader perspective, one of the reasons we like Bitcoin so much is because it's open source and it's a competitive currency. There's hundreds and thousands of altcoins out there. Anybody is free to make one, and they're free to compete. Every currency is free to compete for users, and whatever one is really the best one will probably eventually pull out ahead. And, the reason that pertains to this issue is because the wallet software is the same way, or similar. There are, I think he says, hundreds of different wallets out there. Yeah, he says hundreds of different wallets with dozens of different implementations. That's the same kind of thing. Even within Bitcoin, we have all kinds of options and competition when it comes to wallets. And that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it keeps things more decentralized.
Yeah, and so the reason then that complexity becomes a problem is because the more complexity you add, the harder it is to replicate or to fork. I guess fork is a better word. It's harder to make a different version of a Bitcoin wallet. And so if things are so complex that only 2 or 3, I guess, companies or corporations or people with a lot of money are going to be able to handle that complexity and make the new wallets and competitive wallets, if things are that complex, then you're not going to get as much competition. You're not going to get as many new ideas being implemented and tried out. Like we see all the time with altcoins and with Bitcoin wallets. I mean, people come up with an idea for a wallet feature and they can put it together. I mean, it depends exactly what the feature is, but it is not hard for a coder to just look at the code, take the source code and edit it. In a couple weeks, a professional coder could have his own version of a Bitcoin wallet. If things had all these extra layers and all these extra protocols for making side transactions or faster microtransactions, and if that was the standard, if everybody basically had to use these different networks to make the transactions happen, then every new wallet would have to deal with all that complexity, and that's it. There's less competition. I don't know. Maybe I explained that too much. That's the bottom line, is there's less competition, so.
Yeah. Things are simpler. Is there a decent analogy?
Yeah,
you
actually,
think of for this?
Yeah, I was actually just about to bring that up, because he does mention HTML5, and, well, he doesn't describe it very much, I guess, but what he says is, contrast this to HTML5, which is only implementable, I don't know, by large corporations.
Oh.
He doesn't say much about why or how complicated it is. I have no idea how you would go about managing HTML5, but there are only 2 or 3 major browsers out there that do use HTML5. I don't know, I guess there's probably a lot more than that if you count mobile and stuff. But actually, it's probably not even about browsers. It's probably about the protocol itself. If I wanted to update or change HTML5, I would never be able to do that. Obviously, it's large corporations that handle that kind of stuff. And that's not terrible. I mean, HTML5 is pretty legit. It's helpful. It's useful. Everybody uses it every day, really. But, you know, especially when it comes to Bitcoin, that's going to be a problem. If only a few people can change it, update it, try out new ideas, then you're not going to get as far. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wonderfully said, Daniel.
I wish I understood the HTML5 analogy more. I don't know if he's talking about. I
don't think there's that much of an analogy there. I think he's just saying.
He does say contrast to this.
What I meant by the analogy was an analogy where someone uses something because it's simple. If you make it more complicated, even though maybe it's better.
Okay.
Less people are going to use that thing.
Okay.
Probably because it takes a certain skill set to use it.
Okay, yeah. No, that's actually a really good question, and it would be good to come up with an analogy, but I have no clue what that would be.
I mean, it's not that hard. It'd just be like if you have a broom and it works, but then you have a broom that also gives you money, but you have to be able to calibrate it to a certain degree or something or other, and you have to mess with it every single time, and you have to know about the mechanics of the inside of it. And after the first time, no one would care afterwards.
We'll go with that. I'm just going to agree with you that makes sense, and we will push on. No, it does make sense, but
I know.
Hey guys, I want to tell you about Wall of Coins, a brand new and very handy service for trading Bitcoin. The platform is designed to enable anyone to get their hands on some Bitcoin. Buyers are quickly connected to an authorized, trusted seller within the Wall of Coins network. Just set a dollar amount for your order, safely pay at a bank near you, and you instantly own more Bitcoin. Buyers don't even have to create an account, so anyone can have access to Bitcoin. Got some extra coin lying around? With Wall of Coins, you can sell it for cash, available immediately in your bank account. Visit wallofcoins.com right now to see just how easy it is. Okay, so despite all of that, even though there are issues like we've just been talking about, he still does like the idea. But there's an even bigger problem. You know, all those issues that I just spent probably 10 minutes trying to describe, all of that is irrelevant for a couple reasons. One, because even if those issues were not issues, even if the protocols and the networks worked perfectly, they're not ready yet. They haven't been developed far enough. They haven't been tested enough. Even though we still might have a year or so, in his experience, he knows that it's going to take longer than that to get something solid rolling out. So even if there were no issues, it's not going to be ready in time. And that's even more important with Bitcoin here, because Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin is value. If you were trying to roll out, well, okay, we were talking about browsers. If I was trying to roll out a revolutionary new browser and I tried to do it really fast with really little testing and everything, I could do that and it might suck and whatever. People would just ignore it.
Yeah, the worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to get pissed off because they won't just, if you're stupid enough to keep on using it, then whatever.
Yeah. But if you did that with Bitcoin, though, it would be a disaster, obviously. I mean, it's people's money. It's people's livelihoods, you know? That's how you get by in life, is with money. And if money starts disappearing, if money gets hung up in the blockchain for days and days, and it could be a huge disaster. So that's part of the reason that we need all this time, this slow rollout to make sure everything works. Test it as much as we possibly can. And yeah, so that's another reason that it won't be ready by next winter. And then there's even another important note that he adds. This guy's a good writer. The way it's at the end of the section, he's describing all this stuff, and then he just puts a really blunt point to the end here. He says, there is no need for us to accelerate that trend unnecessarily, and it would be unnecessary because all of this is solving a non-existent problem. Bitcoin's core technology can scale up without any external assistance. And that's a big thing there. You can come up with all these fancy ideas with all that complexity, all those protocols and microtransaction networks and off-chain transactions, whatever. You can do all of that if you want to, and maybe they will help people down the road. But when it comes to just scalability, we don't need that. It's a non-existent problem, he says, because we can scale up without any external assistance. And that comes back to what I said. I said this at the very beginning of the episode. The block size, the limit on the block size, is artificially enforced. It's only there because the code says it's there. If it's 1 megabyte, which again, I'm not sure on that number, but if it's 1 megabyte, it's only 1 megabyte because that's what the software says. It's one line of code. That's probably more, but it's one variable. It's one number. All we have to do is change that number. So that's why he says, just like the limit was artificially set at 1 megabyte, let's set it at 2 megabytes. Now, that's his proposed solution. So the obvious question, which Tim asked me right before we started, was, well, why aren't they doing that, right?
Yeah, like, what's the point? Like, what is the problem with doing that?
Right, and that's because a change like that would create a hard fork. And, well, yeah, this might not be too hard to describe. Let's say they did that. Let's say they updated the wallet and the block size was 2 megabytes. So I download that wallet and let's say I'm a miner and I start mining transactions with the new protocol and I make a 2 megabyte block. Well, that's awesome. I'm following the rules. I make the block and I shove it out to the network. I start giving it to everybody that I'm connected to. They're going to see that block and they're going to say, hey, wait a sec. This is 1.8 megabytes. It's an invalid block. I can't take this. Right? Because they're still dealing with the 1 megabyte limit.
Yeah.
So that's a hard fork right there. That's what it is. It's when the nodes are not compatible. It's when one person is going to be making transactions or creating blocks or whatever, and there's going to be two halves of the network. One of them's going to be accepting the 2 megabyte blocks, and the other one's going to be rejecting them, and that's the split right there. That's the fork. And obviously that's a problem. You can't have a network with different rules where different people are, I don't know. It's just a giant miscommunication, and it's not going to work out. So that's it. That's the reason that's pretty much the only thing holding us back at this point is a hard fork. And just because it's a hard fork doesn't mean it's impossible. You know, we've had hard forks before. It's something that we have to do. We have to deal with it, and it's going to come along eventually.
just for the sake of not sounding like this isn't like a we have to do this. It's just like obviously, I don't know. I'm picking on you for your language again, but don't get so caught up in this to say that, like, well, we have to do this. Like, this is
okay.
Like a
well, yeah, I could
cause now. I don't like it. Shouldn't be a cause. It's just like, okay, this will work better now.
Right. Well,
why not?
Yeah, I don't know so much about the whole cause thing, but it is important to note that technically, we could deal with slower transactions. It wouldn't really be good for Bitcoin. It might hold it back. It might slow adoption, but technically we don't have to do anything. I mean, we can let it just go and just deal with slower transactions. I don't know what that really means, but it's something to remember, and it might be worth considering.
It doesn't mean anything, Daniel. It's just my negativity. I think that's all it means.
Well, maybe.
Just saying that you can just wallow.
Yeah, I don't know. There could be some value to accepting some level of downside for a certain amount of time in order to come up with a better solution. Now, everything that I just said is relative. Well, how much downside? Yeah. Well, how long are we going to wait? So it's all relative. So it's a really hard thing to consider, but there's always that possibility where you could gain value by taking a hit for a certain amount of time.
Okay, you're saying like if they waited and implemented the Okay.
I get my point there was, again, like we don't have to do this. If you have some revolutionary idea that could completely solve our problems in 2 years, then that it depends what it is. But I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about other ideas, but so far and in a general sense, in a reasonable sense, right now, the experts, the best facts that we have say that we really should just make this happen as soon as we can. Just up the limit, have a hard fork, and just make it happen as soon as we can. Maybe we don't have to, but that seems like the best course of action by a long shot right now.
Yeah. What was the last hard fork for?
That's a good question. I don't know. Quite honestly, I'm not sure what the features would have been. I do know that at the beginning of, I think it was right when we were getting into Bitcoin, it was at the beginning of 2013, there was an accidental hard fork, and this was a huge deal at the time. It could have caused much bigger problems than it did, but they released a new version, and there were some changes that caused a hard fork that was not expected. And
so anyone who updated couldn't do anything. They were on like a new thing.
Right. So they really quickly, what they had to do was contact the mining pool administrators as quickly as they could and just get them to switch over.
Yeah.
So, it's happened before, and it has been a problem. But as for like the features that they've added in hard forks, I'm not too sure. I guess I think we covered it. We hit all of his sections, and that's his main point, is just that we got to do it. We got to up the limit. That's his point here. I do like, and he has kind of a teaser at the end, and I'll use this as our ending too, just because I think it's a really interesting idea. I'll just read it word for word. Some people seem to think that if we hit Bitcoin's capacity limits, there will be a smooth rise in fees, and the free market will sort everything out. This is incorrect. In my next article, I'll write about what will actually happen if we don't fix this problem in time. Now, I don't know what his argument is. He didn't write that article yet. It's just a teaser. But that is interesting, because the people that he's talking about seem to be making a reasonable point. If transactions are becoming more difficult to get accepted, if I'm putting up a transaction and I have to wait several hours for it to get included in a block because of the limit, well, if I raise my fee, then a miner's going to accept it faster because the miner gets the money from the fee, right? So the free market should theoretically just raise the transaction fee and help people. If you want to get a faster transaction, you just include a bigger fee. And I don't know what the argument is against that. Apparently there is one, and hopefully it makes sense to me. I don't know. Does that make sense, Tim, the idea of having the free market sort everything out.
Yeah, it does if the capacity limit wasn't artificial.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it's just a way to...
I mean, if you go till the capacity limits aren't artificial, then...
Yeah, I guess that is a good point. It's like you're just artificially making Bitcoin more expensive to use. Well,
yeah.
if we can make it cheaper by just raising the limit...
By just tweaking a little code. I mean, it seems weird because you're messing with the economy, but you're not really messing with the economy. It'd be more akin to changing something on, like, the computers that mostly run the economy, I would say at least. Like, you're changing part of the system.
Right.
Like, it's not like... Well, I mean, it does make Bitcoin better because it's cheap. That is weird, though. Because that's not like... I don't know. I don't know how to think about that. That's a little bit...
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I don't know entirely either. And it's a really interesting thing to think about, but it also... Maybe we'll make that a different topic and... Well, yeah, I mean, I guess whenever he writes this article, maybe we can go through it then.
Yeah.
So I guess we can leave it at that then. We'll wait for this next article, and if it's interesting, we will revisit the topic and bring it to you guys.
Did you say where people could find the article?
It is on medium.com, but I will always include a link in the show notes, just so you listeners know. If we ever mention an article, and if you want to check it out, always look for the show notes. And if it's not there, let me know. Send me a tweet or leave a comment, whatever. I guess you could Google it too. That would probably find you the article, but I should be putting them in the show notes. So let me know if you ever don't see one, and we'll get it in there. But anyway, yeah, he ends this with "to be continued" because there should be an interesting article to come, and we might have that for you too. Thanks for listening to episode 71. All of the music in today's show was from Jon Stewart. Remember to check out this week's show notes at umeandbtc.com. We'll see you next Thursday.